is up, guys? This is Pete Characters Clark, and welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast. This is episode number 73, and today's title is Poker's Harder Than Law? Question mark, question mark. Not that law necessarily is like the hardest thing in the world, but it's definitely up there with one of like the tougher professions, I think, to work your way up in. And I've actually got a lawyer who has tried his hand at poker recently who I've been coaching, a guy called Hunter. What's going on, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you, Pete?
I'm doing pretty well. What about yourself?
I'm well.
So it's 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning where you are now?
It's 5:44 right now.
Yeah, and it's actually daylight savings has messed us up once again. It's one of my most hated things as students this week being like, hey, are we on? And I'm like, what? I have another hour in bed. Oh, wait, no, I don't. It's for you, it's this time.
It's been screwing me up all week.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. I wish it just happens at the same time throughout the world. But anyway, got to look out for the farmers, right? So from farmers to lawyers, tell us a little bit about yourself to start with where you are in your career and your profession, because what I'd like to do today, as we always do in this show, is give you a student's perspective from ground level. Want to see the real strife and battles of a aspiring poker player and how hard it is for them to succeed in the game and what roadblocks they're having to overcome in coaching. And I want to set the scene by, highlighting that in your career outside of poker, you've had I don't want to say completely an easy time of it, but you've done pretty well and always been quite a high achiever, right?
Yeah, it's kind of weird to say it, but yeah, I went to law school. I went to a good law school, did well. My career's been taking off, I guess. I kind of teach the topic that I study and that I practice, and yeah, everything's going pretty well.
And you're quite young as well. How old are you?
I'm 31.
Okay. So, and you were saying to me earlier that where you are in your career right now is generally like quite far ahead of the curve for where other people would be. Sorry, this is like, come on my show and brag about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to sound like that. I'm bigging you up. You don't have to big yourself up. And I know that you're quite a successful guy and stuff like that. And we don't have to go into that in too much detail. But I would like to stress that like law is like one of the harder kind of academic things to then study and then get ahead of the curve in, right? Because it's quite a popular field. A lot of people want to go into it for the money, the prestige, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I kind of lucked out in a sense. I went to a really good law school, got out and got into an area of law that is pretty difficult to get into, especially as a student coming out of law school. And I fell into a firm with someone who is probably the best in the area. I'd say maybe even my state.
Nice.
And so once I came on with her, she didn't do the typical thing which most people do, which is just throw me in a basement office kind of thing and just make me bill a ton of hours. She took me on and let me go through her cases. So I got to see a lot of issues and a lot of cases that I would have never seen for probably another 10, 15 years into my practice. I got to experience first couple weeks on the job doing a lot of stuff. So it's definitely sped up my career.
Nice. You're at the forefront right away. That's cool.
Yeah.
So talk to me about why then because a lot of people get into poker because it's what they want to do professionally. One day they dream of the freedom, but it sounds to me like you're very happy in your life and your career and stuff like that. And you don't have any aspirations to go full time as a poker player. So what was in it for you then when you got into online poker, hired me as a coach and all of that stuff and started taking it seriously?
Yeah. So I started playing poker when I was probably 10, 12. And I played with my stepdad at the time, and my friends would come over and we'd have like our change and we just play. And that's kind of how I got introduced to the game. I played sports growing up pretty competitively. And when I got into high school, I was pretty good at football, started getting recruited, ended up having some health issues that caused me not to be able to play anymore. And then I kind of reverted back to, I'd been playing poker the whole time, but poker kind of replaced football for me.
Right.
And I really fell in love with it then. And I kept doing it. I would play probably 6 to 7 days a week, even in high school.
Gotcha.
I did really well. It was like the moneymaker years kind of. And back then I would study. I'd read every book I could get my hands on, which back then that was enough of an edge to do really well against a bunch of other high school kids.
Yeah.
And I kept doing it. fell in love with it, got into law school, Black Friday hit, and then I just took this long break until, I don't know, I think I started with you a couple years ago, maybe.
Yeah, so that's when you first came back to the game, right? When you spoke with me.
Yeah, and I just had a conversation with my wife basically and said I just miss this part of my life. It's kind of my golf. So I just threw everything into it as being my hobby that I do, and
Mhm.
I'm competitive, and so yeah, I just study, and that's what I do it for. I'm lucky enough I don't have to have it as an income. I'm lucky enough that I love my career and my job, so I'm not trying to replace it, but it's kind of my thing that I get to do, a couple hours a day that
Yeah,
is just me.
got you. Okay, cool. And obviously being naturally very competitive and stuff, you wanted to jump into probably the toughest game that you can play on the internet right now, where people are doing it as a matter of like being able to, make an income and stuff like that, or they have aspirations to do that. So I think it's definitely a bit different, like jumping into online poker and battling there than it is jumping into some other recreational game where people are maybe a little bit more, not everyone, but a little bit more lackadaisical about it. So yeah, you've definitely picked one of the hardest things to dedicate yourself to and get good at. Beating the rake, beating the players badly enough after beating the rake. It's just such a difficult thing these days. And is it fair to say that the title of this podcast is accurate, that you've actually found that foray into poker tougher than working your way up the ladder of law professionally?
Oh yeah. I've actually told you that I think before
Yeah.
that we'll get into it, but I have mental game issues. And one of the things I've noticed is that for me personally, this has been much more difficult. I feel like if I can ever actually crush this game, it'll probably be one of the hardest things that I've ever accomplished.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, it would be.
And that's not even necessarily a reflection on your intellect or how logical you're capable of being. It's really a reflection on how difficult it is to have your head in the right place where you can apply everything that you're learning in the heat of battle. So let's talk about your mental game issues a little bit, because I think they're fascinating and I think they're really, really typical. Like, I think you'd make an excellent case study in a sort of poker mental game psychology book, because there's many students who actually have the same kind of tilts. And I think as far as fight tilts go, listeners have probably heard me talk about the spectrum of tilts from flight tilts to freeze tilts to fight tilts. And I think, Hunter, you were very much on the right-hand side of that spectrum as I visualize it, where the tilt comes out as the urge to smash your opponents like you might do in that silly egg ball game that you Americans like to play in call football.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that when I said that earlier. Yeah, as we've hit on, I'm ultra competitive, which I think a lot of people will say, but I think even amongst people who say that they're ultra competitive, I probably stand out. I've always done well at things that I've kind of put my mind to. I've been lucky in that sense. And then when it comes to poker, it's the same thing, but with that, I definitely have a really strong, fight response to everything. My job probably doesn't help with that too, since I litigate.
Right.
But a lot of it stems from just growing up and being in sports, and I've always had this approach that I just throw myself. I don't kind of half-ass things.
Yeah.
And so with poker, I do the same thing, and sometimes that hurts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I get in these battles with people, and I end up spewing off stacks constantly.
Yep. Okay.
And I think the root of it is more how I was raised and growing up. Not to get too much into that, but I have this thing about me where if I feel like someone has backed me into a corner, or someone is doing something, and it's kind of hard to explain. If I feel like they think, which is ridiculous in itself, but that they can do something, there's nothing I can do about it. Like, if that's how I perceive the situation, I have absolute extreme response to that.
Okay.
And then in poker, obviously if I'm in the button and I have this battling reg in the big blind, then
Hmm.
that's how it kind of comes out.
Absolutely. I
Um,
think that's super common. It's actually weird, like demographically, I observe that kind of tilt like really, really often. Um, basically in America. I don't know why. I think it might be a little bit of a cultural thing. This form of tilt exists everywhere, but I would say a higher concentration of American students suffers from the kind of I will not be bullied, I will not back down kind of fight tilt if I feel like it's an interesting point you said psychologically. If you feel like somebody thinks that they have free reign to exploit you or take liberties that they wouldn't normally be allowed to take in society, against you, then the response is like extreme retaliation. I think that's a really common thing in a lot of places basically, but especially like I don't know, I want to say like in the like most first world countries of the world or something like that, it seems to exist even more. And it might just be the really competitive kind of rat race sort of career model that we have, where I think in the UK, but maybe even a greater extent in America, we're kind of pressured, aren't we, from an early age that we must excel and we must like achieve, achieve, achieve. And if you went to a top law school, that's going to get embedded in you even more. So it's probably all linked. Your desire to be ahead of the curve and do the best you can is probably the same drive that makes you want to like five bet all in some horrendous spot with 8-9 suited. It's probably really, really linked. How difficult did you find it to adapt that behavior? Because obviously that out and out fight behavior within the felt is not going to be winning poker, right? Because it's going to lead to like way too much, as you put it, spew. So how did you manage to adapt yourself, or how difficult did you find it first off to adapt that instinct that had been hardwired for all of your life?
um, well, I'm still working on it, obviously. Um, it's been I early on. I just thought like mental game issues were I associated tilt with like breaking my mouse
Hmm.
or something along those lines, which I never do. I'm pretty composed.
This is a really important point, right? Let's pick up on that for a sec before we continue, because
Yeah, yeah.
this is super crucial. Sometimes I say to a new student, "How's your mental game?" And they'll say, "It's fine." And I'll always be like, "Aha, right? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
tell me how it's fine." Like kind of dubious, because almost no one has a fine mental game pre-coaching or pre-doing any mental game work. It just doesn't exist, unless you have some emotional dysfunction that allows you to not feel anything. So if you're a normal person who feels emotion, you're going to tilt in many, many ways. And breaking the mouse is just a really extreme symptom of tilt. It's like saying, if I say, "How's your health?" "Oh yeah, it's great. I've never had a heart attack." That's
Right.
ridiculous. Your health could be terrible, yet you've never done the extreme thing of having, or I've only had 3 heart attacks, might be the synonymous to I've only smashed my mouse 3 times or whatever. So it's weird how people, because the word tilt has these connotations about rage and fury and actually throwing something through the window or something ridiculous like that, we seem to miss just like the normal emotional swings that, in my mind, constitute mental game issues or tilt. Like just feeling a little bit like I'm afraid to play today because of what happened yesterday. That's tilt. I'm going to fold here because I've been getting beaten up recently. That's tilt. I'm going to check my bankroll now because I feel uncomfortable about not knowing how much I lost in that pot. That is major tilt, right? So, awesome point. Just wanted to pick up on that. If you're listening to this, you probably tilt regardless of how many mouses or mice, whatever it is, you've broken. Anyway, back to your train of thought. How did you adapt? Talk to us more about your kind of struggle to adapt that fight tilt in the poker climate.
Well, first of all, it just took me a long time to even identify it was an issue.
Right.
Um, and so once I finally did, which it took a atrocious downswing, um, to kind of pick up on what, I just had to finally look at myself and say, what is going on? And we have, and I think, well, we've probably done 3 mental game lessons or so,
Yep.
4 since that started.
Hmm.
Um, and so first was just identifying the problem. And then once I finally did and came to terms that I do have this issue, um, a lot of what I've been doing is journaling, which is just not normal for me.
Hmm.
It's not a comfortable thing for me to do.
So you never had the diary in high school. Talk to this girl today. She blanked me. Don't know what's going on. Really liked her. Maybe she's not into me. Never had that.
Yeah, no. I will say though, when I was doing really well at a younger age, one thing I did is I kept a journal just kind of logging my wins and losses.
Right.
I took it very seriously early on,
Mm.
and I would take little notes about like, don't drink while I'm playing, like when I'm high school underage drinking or
Of course.
that I'm admitted to. But, I would do stuff like that, and it always helped me. And then I just stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so once we kind of had this conversation about, maybe I should be taking these things down so we can actually have something to look at, I started doing it, and it's been night and day.
Yeah, diagnosis is kind of essential. Without that, treatment is kind of just a non-starter. It doesn't make any sense because we don't know what we're treating. So I think when we diagnosed that actually the reason, because I remember your game one week would seem quite solid, then the next week I would look at your hands and I'd just be like, what the hell are you doing? And you'd be like, I don't know what's happened in this last week. And it would be like your play wouldn't actually have any kind of like logic that was in the framework of your game. You'd maybe justify it in some way by being like fold equity. And I remember we used to always fall back on this crux of like fold equity, like, and I'd be like, what is fold equity? And you'd be like, making him fold before I have to fold would basically be, if I may paraphrase and simplify your response. And that, I would say, well, that is just a mental game issue. That is just the belief that the victor in poker is whoever folds last, basically, which would be absurd if that was the game. A winner in poker is not someone who has never bluffed. It's someone who has bluffed fairly often, but not too often, right? So
right.
When we figured out that that was going on and this fight tilt was like this kind of backlash in your mind, we had the direction to do a few mental game lessons and say, today, we're not going to actually talk about, you might feel uncomfortable out of position in 3-bet pots, but first we're going to talk about why you feel uncomfortable out of position in 3-bet pots, and then learn technically about how to deal with them. And generally, why you felt uncomfortable out of position in a 3-bet pot was that he had the initiative, he thinks he can just bet all the time, I'm the bitch here, I'm kind of taking this, like facing the c-bet with a weaker range. And then it was, like you said, retaliate to the most extreme form possible and check raise with no equity, and it would even be things like, I remember this fight tilt would be so strong that we would sometimes just double barrel like an absolutely like pristine EV checking hand, something like second pair that we'd like bet the flop with, and we'd just smash the turn with it or something like that, because all that mattered to the fight tilt side, to the kind of the ego, the child within your brain, was getting that fold and being the one that folded last. And once we started to work on that, we started to make quite a bit of progress from there. But that wasn't like the only tilt, right? There's like lots of stuff going on in a mental game. There's many types of tilt, all kind of firing at the same time. Have you experienced any other ones other than that sort of snap retaliation, I'm going to fight you tilt?
Yeah, I mean, going through this journaling process, what I quickly learned was I'm just an absolute mental fish. And I have these set columns in an Excel spreadsheet, and one of the things that I've really noticed is that my mental state going into the game is a huge one for me. I do work long hours. I get up really early to do this primarily, but it makes for a long day. And then coming in and playing at 9 o'clock or so, it's a lot of times that can cause problems. I have 2 kids. I have a wife who's in nursing school full time. So, we just have a busy household. And so distractions and those kind of things are definitely issues that I have that cause problems in my game. Even something as small as like having a beer when I come home and then playing.
Yeah.
Like I log that. Not that I drink a lot or anything, but if I just come home, have a beer, talk to my wife after work, and then I play an hour later, like I can notice a difference. And then with this journaling, I'm hoping as I go, get further and further along with it, that I can, find the connections there too. And I definitely have.
Yeah.
Times a day is huge for me. I've played a couple times, like during the middle of the day on Saturdays or something, trying to squeeze in sessions because I can't get a lot of volume in. That typically doesn't go well for me. Typically what I find my best sessions are my regularly scheduled sessions that I do daily,
Yeah, absolutely. It's so weird, isn't it, how these small, tiny external factors can be so volatile and can have such a massive effect on us humans. Like, we are really just such, like, we're so unstable and so vulnerable in that way that, like, the slightest change to our routine can just cause chaos. And, like, just one thing, like having a beer. I remember saying in loads of podcasts before that if I ever took a hot bath and then sat down and tried to play poker, my head was a mess and I just played terribly. Like little things like your body temperature being slightly higher, it just shows you that we're just these physical things that we have to regulate, when we play and when we do stuff we're serious about. Otherwise, we are going to inflict kind of external to the game tilt on ourselves. So that's kind of what I'd call external tilt. It comes from your environment. And like, I don't even know how you do it, man, because in my house, we have 2 dogs and me and my girlfriend and no kids. And if the dogs are trundling up and down the stairs while I'm playing a session, I am instantly on like mega tilt. Like, I need to quit that session, So I cannot imagine having 2 kids, running about and stuff. And I hear your kids get up in the morning sometimes when we're doing lessons.
Yeah.
And I just think like, you're playing poker with your wife, getting your kids ready for school and stuff while you're sitting there playing. And I just can't imagine being able to do that. So I think but you're probably used to that now. That's my point, right? So that's okay for you.
Well,
whereas Saturday afternoon, you're not. And that makes you tilt more because you're just not in your comfort zone.
yeah, and typically I do all my studying in the morning and coaching sessions in the morning. I may play a short session early, but typically what I do is once they go to bed, my wife knows I play at a set time,
right?
And then I just do that and it's quiet, and so then that's fine. It's actually when I do try to squeeze in when they're up or something that it's a nightmare.
Got you.
And, another one I've found is caffeine and music
right.
cause problems.
Right.
Like if I love coffee, so if I've had multiple cups, and then I'm listening to, I don't know, some kind of like rock music or something.
Yeah.
That doesn't help with especially my form of tilt. Mm-hmm. Like I just want to, I'm in the mood. I may be in a great mood, great mental state, but I'm just constantly, I start focusing on how can I make them fold? How can I, which you've seen, I'm capable of running an aggression factor of like 6.
Yeah. And I hadn't actually seen that before. I think when you first came to me for coaching, AF aggression factor, by the way, for anyone who's wondering, it's a ratio of how many bets and raises you make divided by how many calls you make. So it's basically a measure of your passivity or aggression. So high numbers mean more bets and raises to calls, which means you're aggro, and low number means you're more placid, more calls versus bets or raises. So a normal AF, right, which we've now got you down to, is like something about 2.5 there or thereabouts. And I think this month so far you're running like 2.63 or something like that. You were showing me earlier, which is really good. That's you like for the first time in your poker career actually hitting a normal AF. Where
I've never been under 3.
You've never been under 3, right? And I used to run 4 back in the day, right? And that was normal back then, because it's interesting that back in the polarized days, as I call them, of like 2011 or something like that, around the time Black Friday would have hit or slightly afterwards, the community was obsessed with the idea that you never ever bet or raise a medium hand for any reason ever. Like there's no such thing as protection. Either you're bluffing or you're value betting, and calling is bad, and anyone who calls is going to be a losing player. This was like the kind of fallout from like 2007, 2008, 2009 that went into the decade after the first decade of the 21st century, because I despise the terms naughties and teenies and I refuse to ever use them. But yeah, so when we got to like 2012, right, it was normal to run an AF of like 4 because you were just like bet. But that was actually really, really suboptimal. And the players who actually crushed were the guys that ran like sub 3, but over 2. And now that's seen as like normal. But you were running 6, which even in 2012 would have been like off the charts aggressive. Like, oh yeah, maybe you should find a few spots to check. Aggression's not good. Sorry, aggression's great and being passive isn't good, but maybe you're too aggressive. But now 6 is like almost 3 times what it should be. And that just showed you that you had no selectivity whatsoever as to when you would apply aggression. It was just running the aggression that was the goal and not why or where or when. And I think we've fixed that a lot. But that external conversation is really interesting as well, because I think you hit upon a few things there that really do impact poker players when they play. Keeping a diary, do you have a beer or not? All these little things are massive. So anyway, that's us discussed your mental game problems. So it's fair to say then that the way you were in life, which actually worked for you in life, right? If I'm understanding this correctly, this kind of, I will work really hard for everything. I'll push myself to my absolute limits and I won't accept, anyone, beating me to anything. I'm going to get there first kind of attitude that served you well in life was actually terrible to go into poker with. It was actually like one of the worst attitudes you could have had. And that is, to me, really eye-opening because it shows you that life in poker are not the same environment. They are polar opposites. And sometimes the people who are really good at life suck at poker, and the people who in life maybe are a little bit, I don't know, like the cliche would be like a bit like Rain Man-esque, socially awkward, and very good at processing things, but not very good at, you know, succeeding in social environments or whatever, and maybe don't have direction and end up kind of spending a lot of time on their own. Sometimes those guys absolutely crush because they don't have the real life, the good real life habits that are bad poker habits. So I really think that one of the biggest challenges for us is, as we go into poker, is understanding that all the routine thought processes that have served us well so far and are inbuilt and ingrained are not necessarily going to prepare us well for this new climate that we've entered, where variance is sky high and the whole mindset needed is completely different for success. So I wanted to use you as a case study today to sort of prove that. So do you feel like that's kind of taught you something about poker, the fact that you couldn't just use your normal formula and succeed at it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it actually the way I approach everything in my life in general cost me some time poker-wise and turning this around, in the sense that you had to tell me after, I don't know, about a couple sessions, I kept asking, well, what can I study? What can I study? My response to a downswing is just to go back and just read the Grinders manual, you know, go through 100 hands. Yeah. I'm in I have a good study group. And it was just to throw myself at the book. Like, I'll just memorize all this stuff. But that did absolutely nothing when we had to put a hold on theory stuff.
Yep.
And just be like, no, it's the mental game. And it was actually crushing. It was making things worse because I feel like I'm studying more and more and more, and I'm doing worse and worse and worse, right. Which was just snowballing on me, because I wasn't addressing the real problem.
Absolutely.
Which is my mental game was terrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, the way what has got me where I'm at right now was absolutely killing me on the poker table.
I find that fascinating because it's like such a common thing. Like, why am I not succeeding at this game? Because your subconscious is treating it like it would normal external reality, and poker is not external normal life. It's a very weird environment where if we had we evolved and grown up, right, in poker, we would be absolute complete psychopaths. We would be selfish, ruthless, cold, calculating psychopaths that were incapable of doing anything good for the world. That's who we would be if we'd had to evolve in poker, in my opinion, because it is literally just sitting back and calculating expected value over and over again and being completely as emotionally dead as you can to all other aspects and all other human interactions and, you know, emotional transactions that you might have. They're just dead. They can't exist. So it's a good thing we didn't evolve in poker. It's a good thing we didn't grow up as poker players. You kind of did, because you played when you were 12 and also drank beer while you played when you were 12. It's a bit weird.
Not 12.
Maybe not 12. No, I'm putting words in your mouth now. But yeah, the point is we didn't grow up in that environment. So of course we're going to find it completely difficult. It's like being dropped in a foreign planet. It's like being dropped on like some distant galaxy and having to adapt to a whole new world with different, you know, atmosphere and people and everything and species or whatever, survival conditions. So it's normal that everything that got you really far in life actually put you really far back in poker. And had you listened to a podcast like this earlier at the start, you might have thought, okay, maybe I need to approach this specific venture with a different sort of approach, and that would have saved you time, like you said, and hopefully it'll save other people time who are in this boat. Sorry, go on.
Well, it's like one thing that really stuck out to me that you had said one time was that, you know, you can't outwork variance.
Yep.
You know, which variance to me is kind of foreign, you know, or at least it has been. It's always been, if I work really hard at this and I'm naturally skilled at it, I'll get this outcome, or I can see the outcome and it's pretty easy to predict. But with poker, you know, I can work really hard, I can be naturally skilled at it, but variance could kill me.
Yep.
And I just couldn't grasp that. And it just doesn't naturally sit well with me.
Yep.
Which just creates all sorts of issues.
And it shouldn't sit well with you, because if that sat well with you, you would be really bad at making life choices, because then you wouldn't have a healthy feedback loop with which to criticize your own actions and improve them.
Correct.
So that's normal. And that, unfortunately for us as poker players, that feedback loop of that went right, I am responsible, I have done well, I'm proud, or that went wrong, I am an idiot, I have messed this up. This is so inherent in our genetic makeup and in our life so far, and we need that to survive, that it's incredibly difficult to shake off, even when consciously you are 100% clear about the fact that it's not helpful. So, I mean, I can sit down and play a session tomorrow as a dinosaur of the game. You know, I'm a year older than you, and we are dinosaurs of the game now by the standards of the modern kids who are coming up. And I can sit down with that amount of experience as a winning player under my belt. I can play a hand, and I can play it in just like an okay way, and my brain will still go, you utter god, well done, you nailed that, because I won the pot, right? Or I can play a hand terribly, or I can play a hand fine, sorry, and lose the pot, and my brain can still go, oh, well, that's not okay. Like, we are not okay here. We need to figure out why that went wrong. We need to fix this. And it's kind of the child within us that kind of goes, not okay, bad. Bad consequences equals bad action by me equals I need to take a good, hard look at myself and fix that. And when we fix things that aren't there, we end up in an absolute mess. And that's what you were doing when you were hacking the books. You were trying to fix technical mistakes that weren't technical mistakes. They were mental game mistakes.
And then I started screwing up the technical mistakes, basically because of that.
Right.
Information overload.
Exactly. And just seeing technical mistakes where there weren't any and missing technical mistakes where there were some. And that can get really problematic. So I guess the upshot here for people listening to this is, just because you don't break the mouse doesn't mean you don't tilt. And if you do have really bad mental game issues that you've never looked at before, there's a very good chance that it's that's stopping you from making progress if you're feeling like you're hitting walls, and not your inability to process logical concepts or technical stuff, for sure. Let's just finish off by talking briefly about the technical stuff, now that we have diagnosed and treated some mental game things, and now that we're working in the right direction with that. So technically, now that we can see fully what was wrong with your game technically and how to fix it, what would you say are a few of the main takeaways from your technical game?
One of the main issues I was having was just my c-bet stats. Obviously that goes with my aggression, was I would just c-bet everything, especially out of position. And then even worse was I 3-bet a pretty good amount. I now think I have a pretty good pre-flop game. But 3-bet pots out of position, I was making huge sizing mistakes. That's one of the things I've recently discovered. I would make my same c-bet size where, let's say if it was a board where I should be polarizing and betting a larger size, I would make it 3/4 pot and a 3-bet pot, as opposed to like dropping it down to half pot or something along those lines, which was just creating massive pots really for no reason.
And I think you were doing it with too depolarized a range as well, and actually building a huge pot with something like pot pair, bad kicker, and then we're potting flop against a nitty player that's just going to filter massively when we make that bet. So yeah, I think we used to filter people far too much with like medium to good hands. That was like one technical mistake that we definitely cracked down on a lot and fixed. And c-betting too much out of position in particular, like you say, yeah, for sure.
Like I would hit middle pair and I would turn that into a c-bet where I should just use it more as like a bluff catcher, and check out of position, doing things like that.
And I think another thing technically that we worked on recently was seeing check as an option that should actually be considered along with bet, rather than just seeing the pros of bet and then choosing the aggressive line. So actually not closing our mind to check in the first place as a viable or potentially viable alternative.
Yeah, I always start with I'm getting better at it, but I always started with everything started with just bet. Like, what reason can I, which is where the fold equity thing came in, where you actually, for weeks, I wasn't even allowed to like mention fold equity, because that was like all I would focus on. But if I couldn't value bet, it instantly went to, okay, well, can I bet and make them fold? I never considered checking.
Yep. And then we started talking about calling. Right. And then we started talking about the difference between useful fold equity and useless fold equity as well, which was a big turning point for you when you realized that if villain folds here, I have achieved very little because I've made him fold very little equity against my hand. Whereas if he continues, I've hurt myself a lot. And then we started to see that check has a positive EV. I think that was another turning point, because the pot is already X, and that is not X that's your money anymore. It's in the pot. Checking and remaining in that pot and realizing more equity and going towards showdown where you'll realize more equity again is massively plus EV. And when people realize that checking is usually massively plus EV, they don't like betting quite as much anymore, and that's what brings the aggression factor down from 5 towards healthy territory where it is now like 2.6 or something. You've had a really good week this week, right?
Yeah.
And what do you think what did we do recently that you think was responsible for turning your game around a bit? Obviously, you've been running good as well. I've seen the graph, but what do you think has been responsible for helping with that recently?
Just being really, I think two things. One, I've been really conscious about my mental state prior to and during my sessions. So if I haven't felt like playing, or it's not a good circumstance for me to be playing, then I just haven't been.
Yeah.
Two, I keep my Excel spreadsheet, which also keeps me from looking at my graph mid session.
Good.
I note any kind of thoughts as I'm playing. And if they start getting negative in the sense that they're tilty thoughts one way or the other, I'll end my session too. Or if something hangs with me for a while, then I'll tend to end my session. So I've been playing a better game overall.
Yeah.
The other is just kind of being aware of showdown value and just getting the value of actually getting to showdown.
Right.
Has been really helpful. Just realizing that I can just check and control the pot a little bit and just get the showdown. I don't want to necessarily build, a massive pot with top pair.
Yep.
In certain circumstances, just being aware of those things has absolutely helped.
Cool. All right, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show today. I think that'll be really helpful for a lot of people, and we'll get you back on at some point, maybe in a year or something, and check in and see how things are going. But I think now that we're starting to fix that we're headed in the right direction. So thanks for being an interesting student and interviewee, and we'll get you back on again in the future.
All right. Thanks, Pete.
No worries. So if you guys are looking for coaching like Hunter did, you can check me out on carrotcorner.com coaching page. You can email me if you're interested via the form on the coaching page of carrotcorner.com, or you can send me an email to admin@carrotcorner.com, and we can talk about setting up a coaching package. Have a look at the packages and pricing first and make sure you're okay with that before you contact me, and then we can set something up. Alternatively, you might just want some free products, and I recently released one of those on my website. It's called Modern 3-Bet Ranges, and it's a good way of adapting a very aggressive, let's not say aggressive in front of Hunter in case he goes and runs an AF of 6 again, but an aggressive 3-bet chart that you can use to really hit the ground running at the micro stakes. It's available for free. Just head over to carrotcorner.com, click on it. It'll take you to the store. You can donate if you want. All donations you guys have sent so far, really appreciated no matter how small. It makes it even more worthwhile to help you guys out with free stuff. And there's also the Grinders Manual, complete course in No Limit Hold'em, 100 hands, a complete hand review book with 100 basically dissertations on 100 hands that you can pick up as well on my website, and Pio versus Population as well. So check out my products if you haven't already. I will see you guys hopefully next week for the next episode of this. I will get that set up, and thank you for continuing to support and watch the podcast. Good luck at tables, guys. See you next time.